Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a great DOES conference. I know that I am. Thank you all for being with us today. My name is Ivan Krnić. I'm the curator of 0800 DevOps newsletter and the host of 0800 DevOps podcast. And I'm so glad I can welcome here today co-authors of the latest novel coming from IT Revolution called Investments Unlimited. So a warm welcome here to my guests, John Rzeszotarski, Tapabrata Pal, Jason Cox. We have Michael also here today, and Bill Bensing will be joining us a bit later. So gentlemen, it's so great to see you here all together.
Hey, thank you very much for the invitation. This is an awesome pleasure for us to be here and talk about the book.
Yeah, the book is really great, but we will get to that.
Yes.
So this session is delivered by CROZ. So we are a cloud native consultancy, and this is actually us recording a live 0800 DevOps podcast episode with Investments Unlimited authors. So I'm very excited about this. 0800 DevOps newsletter and podcast started as my personal learning and getting in touch project, and it grew over time into a sociotechnical newsletter covering the topics of technical excellence, organizational improvements, and productivity. So folks, please check it out. I will put the link later on in the chat. And if you feel like this is something useful to you, please, I encourage you to subscribe. CROZ has also sponsored the Investments Unlimited book giveaway that was going on these days. So I hope you grabbed your copy of the book. I promise you, you will love it. You'll be done probably in one weekend, and then you'll come back to the office on Monday morning full of ideas what to do better. This is something that this book does to you, I know firsthand. Folks who joined us at this session, please do feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A section, and we will cover them along the way, definitely. So first of all, gentlemen, congratulations on the book. It is so relevant and so timely today. The book is officially available for pre-order, but I was lucky enough to get a glimpse at it before this conversation. So could you maybe share with our audience that didn't still see the book, what is the book about?
Go ahead, Jason, John.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Well, it's a story. It's funny because how it started, right? We originally wanted to basically write a paper kind of talking about the importance of automated governance and trying to make it tangible. We had written a paper a year previously before we started the book, Topo, myself, and several others. And it was really trying to document essentially specifications that if you don't take these things seriously, your DevOps transformations, going to fall over. And as we were kind of trying to write the second iteration of the paper to make it more tangible, we realized it was really boring, like super boring. so what we did was we decided, and I think Jason, might have been your idea, right? Like, let's turn this into a story and a fictional story. And then obviously, we are huge fans of all of Gene's books. And so we kind of just, set off in that same type of direction and tried to make it a lot more interesting, trying to put the characters together to show some of the pain points that people feel, is in their day jobs, so that's really kind of how it kind of came to fruition. But guys, add any other commentary in, please.
Yeah, and maybe an afterthought, but what happened in the process was that we started realizing soon that if we had written a paper, and it would be boring, as John said, and it would contain all the technical details of many things that goes on in the pipeline and, gathering evidence and all that. But then there are more to that. The technical aspect of it just, I think, is a small part of the whole story. And unless we told the whole story as to what goes on in a big enterprise, especially in regulated enterprise, it's hard to kind of understand the whole problem space. So it's not just the technology part. There are human elements to it. There are organizational boundaries to it. And there are, of course, the separation between audit and compliance and development team involved in this. So we wanted to tell the whole story so that anybody who is in this journey can understand the whole landscape of problems that they are getting into and they need to solve.
Yeah. I would say one thing that was just is amazing. First of all, there is an aha moment. Like you'll see as you get through, there's the aha moment of like, oh, this actually makes a difference. And frankly, that was kind of the core. Like it's stuff that that John and Michael had come up with, right? It's like, hey, this technically, like we could really help deliver this to the community, would be a great benefit. Others could follow this. But when you write it down sort of in the non-narrative style, which is the direction we're going in almost outline fashion, it was extremely dry, right? I think back to what John was saying, like that was the original iterations of it. But when we cast it into the human realm, right? When we started telling the story, like we created the characters, they just came off the page. Like we started, because they're the people we work with. It is us, right? And then suddenly it became part of the narrative, right? The story. And weirdly, like we just want a short story. That's all we want to do. Put together this really short story to kind of walk people through to get to that aha moment, to take away sort of the gems that would help their business, right? And weirdly, like as we put that together, it's like, wow, this is a compelling story. These characters are us, these characters who we work with. And I think it built a life of itself in that sense, right? And we were very happy with the paper. Got to be honest, the paper came out was what, 30 pages probably what we would have had. And then we got the call. We got a call from IT Revolution. And I think it was about a year later. Isn't that right, team? It was that, why don't we take this? And they basically said, hey, we have a pitch for you. Let's take your short story and turn it into a book, a short book. And then John Willis on the team's like, hey, instead of a short book, how about a novel? Is everybody in on this? And I think unanimously, we all said, okay, let's develop the characters, the story more. Let's tell more about this. And then we spent time putting together the narrative and adding more to it. And it has been an amazing sort of journey. I mean, that's my experience in this, like working with this team, brilliant technologists and leaders in the DevOps community, and then putting together like our stories and pushing into that, like that human element that is part of the stories you read through it, right? It's like, it's visceral, right? You feel it because we've been there. Like we have been there. I think that was what was so fun about this journey of putting that together and being able to tell the story that actually, hopefully at the end, getting past the aha moments really delivers value, right? To everybody that reads it, picks up some tips.
Thank you. I mean, you can feel this. You can actually feel this experience. And I just wanted to say that I will probably ask you later about some advice on pitching the book to IT Revolution. So it seems like you guys know how to do it. But when I read books like this one, I know that they aren't completely fictional. They were born out of some traumatic experience before. So what have you seen out there in the wild that made you write this book?
So we don't claim it to be totally fictional. We don't claim it to be totally non-fictional either. So we came from, we actually experienced many of the stories that you'll see in the book. And we also talked to many people in this community that told us many other stories. So, if we put down all the stories together, it would be double the size of the book, but that will be another nightmare. So we kind of, went back and forth many a times to kind of lay down the actual story behind that and not miss any important things that we have experienced or heard about. So yes, so it is a fiction, but it is not a fiction. So yeah, John, Jason, Michael, anything you want to add?
No, I think the other interesting thing about it is if you, there was a lot of research done on the paper, a lot of interviews, I apologize. And from that though, I think the one thing that you'll find interesting is how much public information is actually out there that you can actually go pull based off of regulations and audits and and all of the OCC compliance. A lot of that information is out there, is pretty public. So, you could probably see how we could connect a lot of the dots just based off of some of the things that have happened in the industry.
Yeah.
And that was actually one of the things we researched was matters requiring attention, right? So what does that look like? And those that require immediate attention. So you see those MRAs, MRIAs, as you're reading through that, I think a lot of us had didn't know the depth of which those would go. And there's so much you can find out there. And then the interviews, of course, unpack some of that for us so that we could, because we did want to make something that was relevant, right? I think that the intent was to make sure we didn't sort of carry the narrative through something that wasn't plausible, right? So that was important for us, that it was something that would hit home, right, and deliver some real value, and so that visceral aspect of like, this could be real, it could be us, right? I would say another point on that wasn't just like because we also had the concern like this applies to any enterprise. Like I think obviously it's cast in the financial sector, and so that's the narrative. But from many of us who come from all these different industries, it applies. Like when you're talking about shifting left with audit compliance and security and DevSecOps, that applies to anybody in the enterprise. And so I think the narrative is, as you read through it, you realize, hey, that applies to us too, right? And hopefully people can take that away as they read through the whole conclusion. Right? So.
Yeah, and one more thing is that I think most of the characters are real characters. We just change the names.
No.
Do you think those people would recognize themselves?
Yeah, it's funny. I do think that's part of that pushing into the narrative was like when you take part of like your own experiences or those you interact with and those stories that we live, right? And you put those into characters, it's funny, they become so real. Like I'm on the page. It's like, I know that person now, right? I think we all know Michelle. We all know Bill, Jada. We've been in those meetings with them, even though that's right. That's not, those aren't direct people, right? We're not writing somebody's story there, but when you read it, it becomes so real. And you're like, yeah, I've been in those meetings with those characters before.
Yeah. And the leitmotif of the book is governance. And I talked to many people about governance, and it's strange how everybody seems to know what governance means, but nobody is very clear when articulating it. Did you have these problems in aligning on common understanding of governance when you were writing the book?
I think if you remember at the very first of it, we throw that out there because I think just the word governance. And frankly, like I think if we just that's the title, governance, and put that on the bookshelf, people probably walk around that, right? I mean, and I think that's essentially what we just hit that head on. We said governance, if people have a completely differing various reaction to that word, right? So as soon as you start talking governance, either you love it for the sort of the order that it can bring, right? And so you're seeking that. Others like avoid it from the friction that it brings and slows everything down. So I think it does mean a lot to a lot of different people in different ways. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, the other way to look at it is the governance that we talk about in an enterprise setting. Governance means a lot of things, right? It's just not what we have written in the book, but the use of that word governance in that context is around DevOps and software delivery lifecycle and all that. So don't take governance and apply the same governance that we talk about here and apply it somewhere else in the enterprise. That will not fit. So it is the context that I want to call out, that is the context of DevOps, software delivery, people transformation and all that.
Yeah, and in this context, I must say that the definition that you use in the book is so far the clearest to me. The governance meaning managing promise that we make to the regulators, to our customers, and to each other. Yeah. And it seems like very down-to-earth definition of what actually governance means in our context.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. That part of the narrative is really, I think it was important because you're right. Because when it comes by way of compliance or controls, right? It has, when you talk about it in terms of that, it has this negative connotation. Yet in reality, it is just that. Like we're very familiar. It's a very human thing to make promises, right? And it's like, that's what we're doing. And are we keeping those? Right? I mean, we made some promises. So let's, what's the way to evaluate that? That's the governance, right? So I think if you cast it in that light, it becomes a lot more human and approachable. Right. And that's the whole point. And automatable, that's the whole point too, right? It's like, how much can you put of this into automation to reduce that toil, the automatable action that helps us stay true to our promises, right? So it's really good.
Yeah, and that kind of brings out even another reason why we think that the book, the way it is written, is useful, because if it were a technical paper, we could not have used certain definitions and terms the way we use to explain what it is. In a book format, we could easily do that because it's just some human beings saying out things or saying out things loud. And not only that, in the book format, we could also present other differing opinions and point of views that it could not have put in if it were just technical paper.
Yeah. And it makes such a difference when you're reading something that could, as you said, be very boring when written as a formal paper, as opposed to a novel that you can really relate to with the characters. And
Well, I was just going to add, to that point, some of the things that John and I found in our experience that led us to our contributions in the book were that a lot of the challenges that we ran into weren't technical. The software in and of itself is not extremely complicated, but getting it rolled out, getting it adopted, and getting people to believe and buy into it across an organization and all the different stakeholders, that's where a lot of the challenges were. And obviously those are things that can't really be, communicated well in a technical paper. We had to tell some of the stories of what we had to overcome to really convey what it would take to get this to succeed. Yeah.
And one thing that Investments Unlimited, I'm talking about fictional companies, suffers from in the book, is something that we also see in real life. So, and these are organizations that are very eager to start their DevOps journey, but that DevOps journey ends soon after enough deployment pipelines are created. And DevOps in these cases is basically a synonym for a specific and very narrow automation that happens somewhere down there, buried in the IT department, while all other functions are left aside. And this seems like a huge waste of potential improvements in those organizations, doesn't it?
Yeah, Michael, I think you'll be the best person to answer that.
Yeah, I definitely think that was part of the challenge, was really, the variance that we saw throughout an organization and all the different types of pipelines and delivery systems. I think, John and I could tell you stories about, one of the biggest challenges that we had was even defining what is our universe, right? Like, what are we trying to govern? And I think, we communicated some of that in the book, the discrepancy on what people think are covered by this and, what people don't, right? And then like I said, there's a technical component to it, but the organizational challenge of going out there and gaining adoption across all the different pipelines that we saw.
Yeah, I think the at the end of the day, it's all about incentivizing, right? Like at the end of the day, developers just want to go develop, right? They don't really want to care about governance. They just want to be able to do their jobs, right? And if they're good developers, they're lazy, right? So they're probably trying to find fast ways to get around the system as fast as possible. And that's where really like the paperwork and those controls and those manual controls that like overwhelm and all of the different financial services institutions I've worked at, it's overwhelming, right? And it's just, it becomes a thorn in the side of development teams a great deal. So the trick is, how do you incentivize to just say, we just want you to do your jobs, and we want you to do your jobs the right way. But can we put you in an environment where if you're just doing your job the right way, then you're meeting compliance and everything is complete. You have complete traceability through the entire systems. Yeah. So you're going to make the auditors as happy as possible. So I think that's the part, I think, as the one thing that, I hope you guys take away from the story is the fact that it's all about dealing with everyone's incentives and trying to be able to use that to kind of overcome the overarching problem.
But I think what John Willis called it, really early on when we were discussing some of our experiences, he said, it's simple. You make the right thing the easy thing. Yeah. And I think that encapsulates really, the ultimate goal of what we tried to build.
That's it. Make them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The other John Willis quote that is, throughout the entire thing, it's making it from subjective to objective. That's the entire goal.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's this particular part, make the subjective objective, is something that is very explicitly said in the book. I remember precisely, and it was a sort of a revelation for Michelle when she was figuring out that this objective part in this governance is super important, actually. And it's what makes the difference between one way of working and the other.
Exactly. I mean, that's the proof, right? It's not a spreadsheet, it's not a document, it's not a set of checkboxes or emails or Slack messages. It's the data. It's objective. It's like what Bill was talking about in his talk earlier today. The colors, red, green, black, right? It's objective right there.
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of science fiction movies and this waste of potential to circle back to the beginning and looking at this DevOps journey only through narrow lens in the IT. It kind of reminds me on Contact with Jodie Foster when she and her father talk whether extraterrestrial life exists, and her father says, if it was just us, then it would seem like an awful waste of space. And it is a really nice moment, and kind of reminds me also on these organizations that look very narrowly at all the possibilities that are basically presented in using DevOps principles every day.
Yeah, I do agree, and I think there's you see that those openings, right? Even in the narrative at the very end, right? The realization of how all these teams, which operating in silos separate from each other, realize there's this awakening that if we work together, right? If we don't work together, it's not going to work, right? And we're going to keep running into these problems, this friction. When we work together, pull together, right? All and recognize each other, empathetically pulling, and that's the whole shift left concept that you see over and over in the book. We go faster. Right. And and even to the point of at the very top of the company, right? Susan, our CEO, has that realization that she's got to become a technologist too. Right. It is what the business is. It's all the wires, the pipes, utilities, everything that runs the business have to work in concert, right? And you got to be pulling it together and have that knowledge and the empathetic understanding of it at all layers. And I think hopefully that thread also comes through, and we see her even having that realization and wrap it up at the end.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions in the chat. One, how many of you were involved in writing this book? And how did that work out? By Glenn. We are missing a couple of authors here today.
It's true. There was, when we originally were working on the paper, I think it was 8 of us, right? And when the realization came that we actually have something here, it could be a novel. When John Willis convinced us to invest more time in it, right? Beyond what we did for the paper. He also invited Helen to join us, and we had 9, right? So when you look at something like this, how in the world, like I think I was doing this, I think everybody else, my fellow authors, was like, how in the world do you write a book with 9 people, right? So
we use Git.
In a funny way, collaborative editing tools made it happen. I got to be honest, I think that really was key. But the other was that we did have sort of a good shepherd, Leah from IT Rev, kept pulling us together to keep us on point, to go address things. But I think to some degree, testament to this amazing group of people that I got a chance to work with, right? Everybody we all wanted to succeed and go in the same direction, help each other. I didn't find friction. I think it was like we were riffing off each other as ideas would hit the page and you would see it and you'd review it. And you're like, oh yes, that and this. And that in a very organic way helped us get the narrative to it. I mean, there were big sprints that some of us ran. Credit to Bill. I think he had a big sprint that he ran, many that put a lot of the narrative down the page. It was some of our first draft stuff that got out there that was super helpful from a framework perspective. But everybody, like I think, sort of piled in and as we would meet up on a weekly basis, or we're in the documents, commenting to each other. It sort of had that iterative feel to it, right? As we're developing it together.
And I remember, some of our own contributions opened up more questions for us as a team. And then we said, oh, we need to actually really talk to that person to understand more of this before we go any further. So we had these constructs going on too, that Michael will put in something and then Jason would review and say, is that right? So then John would say, okay, let's talk to that other person, outside of our group and understand more. So a whole lot of that went on into this book too.
Yeah, I think we got really lucky with all of the different personalities and backgrounds across all of the authors, because it was actually very different, right? Caleb brought a certain amount of expertise coming from a very specific security backdrop, and actually could probably tell you a lot about a lot of the regulation that's coming out from the government, which makes this book even more important to read is my honest opinion. And then obviously John, this is something he's believed in, been trying to push for 3 to 4 years, the importance of this, especially with all of his work associated to DevSecOps, and just everybody just had their own little piece to really contribute back to the story. And I think that's really, I think we just got really lucky that we had so many diverse thoughts that we're able to try to get it down on paper, to really try to hopefully tell some form of a collective view. Not to say it wasn't challenging, but it was, but I do think that we just got really lucky too. But
it turned out excellent. And we have another question from Sandeep to Michael. So before rolling out the DevOps model, should we share the whole roadmap with full specifics to all in delivery and ops, or should we go in chunks, try learn with one team and then create the full roadmap?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. And I want John Rez to jump in here a little bit too. I think for the modern governance side of things, I'd say, maybe just from experience, maybe hold off on showing the whole roadmap to everyone out of the box. You might scare them. But I think prove it out with one team and show it and get adoption. One of the challenges you'll have, I mean, I say I wouldn't go the full 100 yards with just one team, because likely you're going to see a variance across the company, mixed between legacy code and development patterns, and then your modern stuff. And so I'd say, build with one team, get adoption, show it, get it in people's hands, talk to your developers, see if it's helping them, and then quickly start to assess what the universe is, and try to extend to as many as possible. One of the things we found too was that, we had to draw a line somewhere, and we actually learned a lot from Topo and his experience with Capital One, saying that, we could build to accommodate all the different types of applications at our company. But if you're doing this the right way, you're going to have a really big incentive for the certain percentage of applications that are really old, really legacy, and not worth building support for. You're going to be able to incentivize them with faster delivery times, better developer experience, right? Less toil, to modernize their application and to come into the new age. And so that's what I'd say is, if you're doing this right, people are going to want to be a part of it, and they're going to make the commitments that they need to adopt it. So that's where we really found we turned a corner.
Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me, guys, of how many conversations we had about the ending of how did we want to end the book, right?
Yes.
Because we talked so much about that. Like, do you give them just enough that gets them on their journey to moving in that right direction? When really, you know what, you're just starting to feel the pain, right? Like in some instances, and I think that's been the really great part about a lot of the books that have come out, whether it's Phoenix Project or Unicorn Project or others. It's trying to give enough information to get that journey, that transformation kicked off, enough buy-in that everyone's just kind of jumping on board, right? For the most part, because they see it, they can feel it, they can almost touch it. The one thing I'd say about a roadmap, my experience is roadmaps are never right the first time. So I definitely wouldn't show a roadmap because you're probably gonna change it a lot. I think you set off on some short-term goals, some short-term objectives, and then everything Mike said is absolutely spot on. I would agree with 100%.
Yeah, to add on to that, I would probably show where we want to go, like point A, where I am, and point B, roughly around where I want to be, but don't show the path yet.
Yeah, show them the vision, the true north where we want to come.
Yeah.
Excellent. And Jeff has a question. From your perspective, who needs to read the book and why? What do you think will get those folks to read it?
I'll go.
Go ahead.
So in the book, intentionally, we brought in characters that are relevant to the book. And there's another reason. I think all the characters and all their levels in there should read the book. So if you are in a company and if you're the CEO, you should read the book. If you're in a company and you're the infrastructure engineer, you should also read the book. And anybody in between, including audit, compliance, risk. Jason, sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
No, I think that is really well put. Yes, I think you can follow anybody, right? So whether you're in audit, you're in security, you're in engineering, you're in product, right? I think you're gonna resonate. It's gonna resonate with you, right? Because I think it was the intention, right? And as a testing point, just a little story. As part of our peer review process, I was able to get the book in the hands of some across the board, right? All sorts of different people that would be part of that character set. One of those was an engineer, a senior engineer, and thought, I wonder what will be their reaction. Very pro DevOps from a principal standpoint. But as she read the book, she says, I knew all this stuff. I've already read all the books. I read Phoenix Project. I know DevOps. And she says, I couldn't even put it down. And when I completed the book, says, I couldn't wait to get back to work because 15 things in my mind that I want to change, that I wanted to try. And when you have that sort of reaction from like an engineer, a senior engineer that they took away from some practical directional advice that they're going to put into place and start having conversations and work with teams, we got to get here. You know that you've done something, right? That you've made a difference. And I think that was the intent of the book, is that whoever that is, you're going to approach the book and you're going to take away something that will have some value to you, like on your job on that next week, right? As soon as you finish the book on the weekend, go and put it into place at work. And that was her reaction. She says, I was overwhelmingly surprised at what I learned from the book and how it changed my thinking around even some of the way that we're approaching our security and our automation of security to be able to shift it left even further. And I want to go test it out right now. And I hope that's what people take away from it. And I think that's another reason we left it open-ended, right? We saw, it's like, don't solve the world, right? If we can concluded like it was 100% perfect versus being on a journey, we had failed, because I think that's the intent. Is the way is constant improvement, right? The way is continual improvement. And hopefully you take that away and you walk away saying, we're constantly evolving, constantly improving. And here's a direction, a vector that we could start that journey on that will inspire and help us get to the next level in terms of that. So.
Yeah, another interesting thing is, and we spoke about this in our weekly meetings on sharing ideas and thoughts. Does fictional book have real life references? And I think we spend a little time on that because our book actually is a fiction, but it has real life references. And, you can actually follow those references through to learn more about any particular subject. So, there are certain mentions in the book, and then we give the reference. This is where it came from. So I have not seen many fictional books or any fictional book that has real life references.
Yeah, I mean, that's a super cool feature of the book. It's almost like Investments Unlimited is a very, very user-friendly manual on how to use all other papers, including DEOPS automated governance reference architecture and all other talks, papers, articles, and as well.
Yeah.
We have one interesting question from Gene. What was the most fun part of this process for you?
Oh, for me, it was getting to hang out this cast of characters right here. Oh, that was an absolute delight. And the iterative thing about the whether it's the storytelling, the narrative that we were developing, or the technical details, like when we dive into this is the way we could solve it, and even introducing and pulling in some experts to talk to. Like when we did the research, wow, it's just mind opening, some conversations that we were having during the process. I think it was the learnings that we were having on the process was also really good.
I think, Jason, as you say that, we always talk about the, part of the automated governance is getting, breaking down that barrier between development operations and then the whole governance organization, audit and compliance. But as we talked to some folks that had the experience at the Fed and all that area, when you had that real in-depth experience, that was, I think, we lived of course, through some of the implementation industry, we lived this epitome that with the book, there was a second level that most folks who has the opportunity thinking about building these systems, talking with the actual regulators in the industry, that right there is that level of conversation, I think was really cool. Because then that actually brought an additional set of perspectives into the narrative and sort of how to describe going about it. I think that was the opinion. Imagine just if in general, if the DevOps industry could say, hey, Fed, hey, let's sit together and just talk about this way to solve this. Let's talk about modern governance writ large from an industry perspective instead of individual organizations. What could and I use the Fed as just an example, not specifically calling the Fed itself. That's just the one on my mind. But dear Fed, if we cooperated on a modern governance approach for industry, what could that look like? How could we actually help the organizations you regulate? How could we help you help yourselves and help the world financial industry, because you think about 2008, what happens when because everything's just so interconnected these days, and now the proliferation of just attacks, whatever it may be, and getting to these how could you help at large? I think that right there was fun. Some of those interviews and those conversations, and then being able to talk about it.
Yeah, for me with a science background, I have published technical papers, in scientific journals like Applied Physics, Physics Review, and nuclear instrumentation and methods, and all those papers. But writing this book was so difficult because it's a story, and English being my second language, it was a big challenge for me to write down anything other which is not technical. So that was a big fun on my side to learn a new skill rather.
Yeah, I think for me, it was the sympathetic, painful stories that we all related to for some reason. I know that sounds horrible, but it's something when you have to go through it yourself, and then when others go through it, there's that kinship that gets created. And I think that there was so many times that Topo and I would tell a story, and we just both feel the pain of going through that experience at some point in time. And I think that's why, books like the Unicorn Project or the Phoenix Project got it right. Cause it's so relatable. It's why would this book is just like going to work, but I mean, that was the best part of it for me, was just cause other people are experiencing the same things that I'm going through and overcoming them in different ways. And we get to tell that story as well.
Yeah, I totally agree, John. And I do agree with Jason's one as well, which was being able to talk and learn from some of the people that were kind enough to come and join us for sessions and to walk us through some of the details of, a regulator walking us through some of the details about an MRIA and things like that. That was really eye-opening and fun. And also being able to write this sort of, almost in real time. There are some points where the book kind of caught up with real life, and
yes, we
were waiting to see how certain situations played out before we gathered back and wrote about it. So that was really fun, being able to take, the things that you're experiencing and weave them into this story and this narrative. That was really exciting.
Yeah, I think what John said before, how important it is to relate with the book. And I found so many of these moments in the book where I could relate to many situations, and I'm sure many other organizations could relate as well. And one of those is the fact that Investments Unlimited as an organization found itself in this dire position, partly because the organization didn't dedicate enough time to end-to-end flow of value, security, automation, technical debt, and so on. And it happened so not because they were technically incapable. It was because they were busy cranking new features. And it seems to me like this is something that we can all relate to. Melissa Perry calls this a build trap. So can you tell us a bit more about this dysfunction and maybe share some personal experience with this?
I love the book Build Trap. I think everybody, especially if you have the title product manager, even as a product owner, read that book. It's funny you say that, Ivan, as people start getting into talking about the build trap. It's just putting features out, nobody tying it back to value. Yeah. And this assumption that just because we're going to market means that we're generating value for the customer or value for the company. I think that's the biggest misconception. And that's the whole idea of the build trap. You're in this trap where you're just building, shipping, but you're not looking at it. And we can almost go back to what Mick Kirsten talks about in his project to product. I mean, that's the biggest thing with the flow metrics, right? And it's tying it back to is what I'm getting through value. I love that book because once I audiobooked it, I didn't read the physical copy, but once I audiobooked it, I'm like, holy cow, it tells you the stuff that and you should know that seems very obvious, but it's not obvious until she talks about it in the way she does. I'll hand it over to people. I love the book.
Me too.
Well, I'd say that one of the great moments in our narrative in Investments Unlimited and the bill in the book, not the bill on the panel here, the bill in the book has a moment of realization that, that really security, audit, compliance, those are part of product.
Yeah.
And that's a hard realization to understand that those need to be prioritized accordingly as those features that he's so passionate about that drive revenue. These have to be weighed in with those same features that you're trying to deliver. And I think that's a great part of the aha moment of Bill's characters he develops, right? Is that he sees that and he runs with that. So I think organizations are, I still see it. I think everybody across, that's still a wake up, right? We're still a ways from that, as an industry, that we're really recognizing that those have to become part of the product story. But again, that's that shift left, right? It's the intent, right? Let's pull this all together so we're all on the same journey. So.
Yeah.
Jason, you say it reminds me of talk, was it Kevin Henley? I think I pronounced his last name. He got to talk about when people talk functional versus non-functional requirements. It's like if you walk into a zoo, if you're like, yeah, this elephant was awesome, but I saw a bunch of other non-elephants. And I think it's a big key takeaway. It's like you can't be just functional versus non-functional. Compliance and security can't be this non-functional requirement. First it needs to move to that concept of functional, but there are subsets of this functionality, and treating it as a feature of your product. I mean, that mindset is key. I believe that's to a large degree, let's be honest, it only gets in if it's a feature. And so maybe is this sort of a reverse Conway maneuver on the build trap, as if you make it a feature, but you're predisposed to putting a bunch of features out. Could you reverse Conway yourself? I don't know. That's just me thinking out. I'll stop right there. This is sort of a fun thought process, but yeah, I always hear about when people say functional, non-functional requirements, like elephants and non-elephants.
See this conversation right here? This is exactly what our weekly meetings are about, right? That was so fun.
I'm not sure how you even ended the book. How did you complete it? But
John alluded to that. Like, I think we got to a point where, like, we don't know where to go with this. Like, how do we want to keep going, right? And it's like we have to come to a conclusion. We have to have something, and I think leaving the conclusion, that vector towards improvement, like you're on your way now, right? This is hopefully create a momentum in the reader's mind, as well as that IUI, that will keep this narrative going forward into the future, and you can sort of project that mentally out, right? So,
and trying to go out of this build trap. Gene also mentioned that in one of his tweets, and Dr. Mick Kirsten had a podcast episode with Jean-Michel Lemot, and his ideal distribution of effort in the organization is in his experience 50% of a platform work, 40% of features, and 10% of experimentation. So is this something that could help us not fall into this build trap?
I'm gonna hold my mouth for a second just to see if somebody else is.
Go ahead, Bill.
yeah, you know this.
So I think this goes to think about this as like, we'll go back to the platform team and team topologies. Yes, like 50%, when you talk about 50% platform, like this is a platform approach. If you start looking at it from the future perspective, looking at it as an internal product. I mean, that we talked about with Bill, the character, and they're getting to that. So yeah, you had the 50% platform team, and the experimentation is important. I think the biggest change around, as you think about from that experimentation, is giving folks the right to figure out what they need to figure out. I remember when Michael and John were talking about red, green, and black, and they talked about red is the things we know don't pass, green is the stuff that we know does pass, but there's just black, there's a black hole. Like you talk about experimentation, like the ability to get that back. And I'll use what Jabe refers to as recommenting, Jabe Bloom, as you hear his thing on the 3 economies of recommenting. Like that experimentation is important because you learn, that's how you start to fill that black void, and then recommend that back into the platform. And I think that's very key, because like that meta concept there that applies to almost anything from a platform and platform team's perspective is very key. But the organization itself has to sort of anoint people inside this organization and give the authority, because let's be honest, most of the organizations that are having these problems, there is a cultural aspect of silos, and you must have authority to do that. Like just think about just traditional governance in general, and so giving the authority for that experimentation and to recommend, and then to make it a true platform concept. But I'll stop right there. If I got anything to add.
Yeah,
I think you know.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
Oh no, I was going to say no. I mean, I think you hit the nail right on the head.
I think it was fun. Mike showed we were talking about some data, and I remember Mike and John showed some data around it. It was the unit testing, and like where you started and where it ended up, and just the fact of showing people writ large what they're doing, but having other people being able to observe what they're doing. Like talk about gamifying the ability to make governance better in your organization. Like that right there what's the book Nudge? I forget the author, is an economist. I think he's a behavioral economist, wrote the book, The Nudge. And like that right there is the ultimate corporate nudge, putting that data out there and saying, hey, FYI, 75% of the organization has better unit testing than you do. Like you don't even have to get punitive at that point. You're just simply saying, and it reminds me of like the book, The Nudge, they talk about like sending letters to people. I think it was in Great Britain about saying, hey, did you know your neighbors pay taxes, to get people to increase the rate of actually submitting tax payments. And like
Dr. Richard Taylor, right?
Richard Taylor, yeah. So you think about that, like ultimately what happens, that data, like these outcomes, like you can use the word gamify, right? If you're going to try to do it that way, but like, or the nudges, just that right there is that right there is I'm overusing the word epitome, but that's just like, those are beautiful implementations and showing sort of like you talk about human systems, like the way human systems are operated. And so this is technology truly in support of the human system.
And Gene pointed that out in the chat too. Just noted. And I think there are some interesting questions on the Q&A and maybe in the chat thread too.
Yeah. We have a question from anonymous attendee. What functions areas were outside the scope of the governance? I would guess it's not possible to automate away all governance. So did the system allow for manual and automated controls?
I'll take the first one. What functions are outside of the scope? There are many functions of typical IT governance that is not in the scope. For example, software asset management is a governance function. Procurement is a governance function. Those are not. And those two come to my mind immediately. I don't know, John, if you want to add anything else, Jason.
Yeah, I think you're right, Topo. This is where, the point of this book was for people that are going to go off, and this actually just came from John Willis too, right? People that are going to go off and do these DevOps transformations, go build these pipelines and do these crazy things. And then guess what? They're going to have a giant incident. And then guess what? Risk and audit's going to go start digging into this and saying, well, where's your controls? Where's your things that you're missing in place? Because, I think we all agree that, this idea of bringing in a DevOps transformation is so incredibly important in an organization, but you can't not bring some of the security side, some of the traceability side, some of the ability to audit side, as well as, approvals. Even something as simple as, a lot of organizations have policies and procedures around, doing code reviews, right? One of the things that, that you should be able to do as part of this process is be able to attest and have traceability back to code reviews, is something as simple as that. And guess what? I'm not going to make people fill out additional paperwork or go say, I was the one that code review in a specific change record or whatever, right? It should just be, I'm doing my day job and I'm going to approve a PR. And guess what? That all of that documentation and traceability is going to be fed directly back to our auditors, right? At the end of the day, that's really the objectives and the goals, is do that DevOps transformation, but you got to tie it together. Otherwise, it could lead to some failures down the road. And that came from Willis, by the way, because he was the catalyst behind that. And I gravitated towards it because I believed in that so much.
Yeah. Excellent. We are getting close to the end of this session, and Moira has a really interesting observation. So there is no equivalent to Brent, the operations guy. He is the most quoted one, the most popular one in Phoenix project. But there is Dylan, and he is SRE. And was there a conscious decision to set up a story to create an SRE character over operations one?
I would say some of the setting, right? If you look a little bit at the setting of Investments Unlimited, was a organization that has already begun their DevOps transformation, right? They have been down the journey. They're sending their teams to DevOps Enterprise Summit, right? Is a good example that they have gone through, right? And they're trying to optimize away from those type of constraints, the Brents, right? You see there's, I think we're all always sort of repeating that, but the reality was that wasn't the area we wanted to address here, right? So I think that part turned out to be conscious. I think originally, right? I don't think we said, okay, let's make sure we don't put a Brent in it. None of us said that. We're all aware of those, but we did. I just want to say that was the intention, was to understand that, well, a lot of companies, a lot of things that are really going well, right? That we're doing some really good DevOps practices. We've moved more agile, right? We're delivering right products. But, right, are you considering audit, compliance, security, right? And I think that was the intent here, was to sort of highlight that, pull that up. I will say also the SRE side that's part of their journey too, was embracing SRE that we're seeing happening across the industry, right? And versus more of another, what does operations look like? We didn't want to go, here's the traditional plan, bill, run silos. Like, we moved away from that. I think the comment even from Bill in this narrative was like, that was a long time ago. We moved away from that. Like, we've moved forward into this space. And so we have characters like Dylan come on scene from an SRE, given their point of view. Again, dealing with some things that I won't talk about here, but even in the narrative that I think a lot of us can relate to.
You know, it's funny we talk about this point because you think about it, Brent. Like I almost look at this. I go back and I see Gene on here, so he can correct me if I'm wrong. But I think like the person who inspired Brent was Herbie from the goal. And so I look at like, I can't say that governance is the form of a Brent because it's not a person that has all the knowledge, but I look at it as a Herbie, right? It is the bottleneck right now in a lot of the highly regulated software delivery. So it's how do you can only pace to your Herbies, to your bottlenecks. So as you start thinking through that, like it is like, how do I just now resolve that Herbie because it'll be another one that pops up. But getting back to SRE, I know one of the things we talked about, and John and I have chatted this a couple of times, Willis and I, is look at automated governance, and use SRE as an analogy for automated governance and modern governance, like bin trainer sloths. In like the opening preface, or like it was a chapter 1 of the SRE handbook, he said, what was it? It was like, and it's not the exact quote, but like SRE was applying software engineering to infrastructure problems. Yeah. If you look at automated modern governance and automated governance, it's the same concept. You're applying software engineering to governance problems. And so as you start to think about that socio-technical value that SRE is offered from a stability and from a perspective, that's sort of that is the exact same concept for the automated governance. Like, let's start solving this with software.
Yeah, I think even so much so that even in the story, right? We have the auditor, right? Realizing that, we're going to have to learn code, right? And we have to sort of even treat that, right? It's like, but that's the intent, right? It is that software oriented approach, even in the audit security space.
Yeah.
Cool.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you most of all for the book. It's really great. Folks, if you like this conversation, take a look at the other conversations at 0800 DevOps newsletter and podcast. And I hope that you had a good time.